All right, today we're diving into something truly mind-bending. A blueprint for life, but with no DNA, no cells, not even any water. We're talking about a life form made not of matter, but of pure energy.
You know, when we search for life out there in the cosmos, we're always looking for carbon and water, right? We just assume it has to be this fragile chemical thing. But what if it doesn't? What if there's a totally different way? A way that uses the most abundant state of matter in the entire universe, plasma.
And this isn't just some vague idea. An independent researcher named J. Alfred has actually put together a super detailed blueprint for how life made entirely of plasma could work. Seriously. He's mapped out everything, how it could be structured, how it could function, and get this, even how it might evolve.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at J. Alfred's big picture, the plasma blueprint itself. Then, we'll zoom in on the anatomy of a single plasma cell. After that, we'll see how the body's internal systems could work, how these things would live and move around, and we'll finish up with a whole new kind of evolution.
All right, part 1, J. Alfred's plasma blueprint, unlocking a new biology. So to really get this, we got to start with the basics, what this stuff is made of, and the core ideas that make the whole thing click.
Okay, so J. Alfred's whole theory is built on this concept he calls dark plasma. Now, this is not the super hot, unstable stuff we make in a lab. No, this is a theoretical form of plasma made of dark matter. The key thing here is that it would be way more stable and could last a lot longer, which, makes it a pretty good potential medium for life to get started.
Now, this is basically the Rosetta Stone for understanding this whole idea. It's brilliant. For every single biological part we have in our carbon-based cells, J. Alfred has figured out a direct plasma equivalent. So our skin and membranes, they become plasma sheaths. Our mitochondria, our little energy factories, they're replaced by something called double layers that act like capacitors. And our circulatory system becomes this grid of energy-carrying filaments. This is literally our translation guide from our biology to theirs.
Okay, let's move on to the anatomy of a plasma cell and see how we start building the body. Now we're going to see how these parts actually come together to form a body, and we'll start with the most important piece of any cell, the nucleus.
So right away, forget everything you know about a nucleus. In J. Alfred's model, it's not some little bag of chemicals. Nope. It's a dense, pulsating cluster of charged particles. Think of it more like an electromagnetic hard drive, an engine that stores all of its information not in genes, but in the patterns of its own energy fields.
And if that sounds a little far-fetched, just think about this. The famous physicist Richard Feynman once said that you could fit all the words ever written in the entire history of the world into a tiny cube of atoms just 1/10 of a millimeter wide. That's the kind of insane information density we're talking about here. It's that exact principle that makes an electromagnetic nucleus totally plausible.
So what does that mean in practice? Well, instead of our slow, clunky chemical process for copying DNA, you've got data encoded directly into physics itself, into the frequency, the amplitude, and the phase of these pulsating magnetic fields. And that information, it could be sent instantly across the entire organism just by using waves. It's a way, way more efficient system.
Okay, so you've got your nucleus. Now wrapping around it are two other super important parts. First, you have these concentric shells of plasma that give the cell its structure and keep it stable, almost like a gyroscope. And then, separating those shells, you have these things called double layers. And these are amazing. They do two jobs at once. They act as the creature's protective skin, and they're also its power grid, storing up energy like a whole bank of tiny capacitors.
And look, this isn't just J. Alfred speculating here. The Nobel Prize-winning physicist Hannes Alfvén actually drew this exact same parallel. He pointed out that a plasma double layer acts almost exactly like a biological cell wall, protecting what's inside from the outside environment. So the idea has some serious scientific weight behind it.
All right, part 3, the body's internal systems, the flow of life. So, we've built a cell. It's got a nucleus, a skin, and a power source. But how does it all work together? How does it function like a living thing?
Well, for starters, its circulatory system would be this incredible glowing web of what are called filamentary currents. Just picture them as arteries and veins, but instead of carrying blood, they're transporting charged particles and pure energy. They're basically the power lines that distribute energy from those double-layer capacitors to every single part of the body.
And how it eats is just brilliant. The whole metabolic system is based on vortexes. It's a 3-step process. First, a spinning vortex is tuned to attract specific energetic particles. That's step 1, attract. Then, step 2, absorb. Those particles get sucked in, their energy gets extracted, and it's sent out through those filaments we just talked about. And finally, step 3, excrete. The used up, low-energy particles get shot out of an opposing vortex. It's a super direct, super efficient digestive system.
Moving on to part 4, how plasma beings live, movement, and energy. Okay, so it can eat and power itself, but how does a creature like this actually get around and interact with its environment?
Well, J. Alfred's blueprint lays out a few different ways it could move, and honestly, each one is way more advanced than our clunky biological muscles. It could use jet propulsion, sucking in particles and shooting them out the back, kind of like a squid, or it could create these powerful electric winds for thrust without any fan blades. But the coolest one? It could just change its own electrical charge and get pulled along the magnetic field lines in its environment, basically turning itself into a living maglev train. How cool is that?
And that brings us to our final section, and maybe the most mind-blowing part of this whole theory. A new kind of evolution, life in the fast lane.
So when it comes to replication, it would be pretty simple and direct, a lot like how single-celled organisms do it. Fission, fusion, budding, that sort of thing. The organism could just split in two or maybe fuse with another one. And because the parent doesn't really die, it just becomes two new daughter cells, this could basically give these beings a form of biological immortality. But here's the absolute game changer. Our evolution, carbon-based evolution, is a hardware problem. It's driven by slow, random mutations over millions and millions of years. It takes forever. Plasma evolution, though, that could be like a software update. By fusing with another organism, a process called endosymbiosis, it could just absorb new traits and abilities instantly. Think about it, it's not a hardware change, it's like installing a new app. It's a rapid, modular, and unbelievably efficient way to adapt and grow more complex.
So when you put it all together, what the researcher J. Alfred has outlined here, it's not just some weird, quirky alternative. It's a complete blueprint for a life form that is more direct, more efficient, and maybe even more resilient than we are. A totally self-contained electromagnetic organism perfectly built for a plasma environment.
And that, of course, leaves us with one final, absolutely mind-bending question to chew on. If a blueprint for non-carbon life this detailed, this plausible, can actually be drawn up, a blueprint that runs on the fundamental forces of electromagnetism, then who's to say it's not already out there? I mean, could there be an entire biosphere made of dark plasma existing all around us right now, completely invisible to our senses?